is up, K Corner Podcast? How are we doing today? I want to address the elephant in the room and apologize for not uploading after the national championship game, or not the national championship, but the semifinals. I was going to do another upload right before the Michigan game, or not, Alabama-Georgia game, and I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I then traveled to Michigan. I had a wedding to attend to, and then I just couldn't find myself going back to podcasting for whichever reason. However, I'm going to be podcasting between 1 or 2 times a week, more likely around 1 on the weekends. Small, simple, full sports report. We got the NBA playoffs, which has been a lot of fun. But today I'm going to be I'm going to be talking about the NFL draft. So the first thing I want to highlight is I'm no draft expert. I don't spend thousands of hours reviewing film. I have watched film on a lot of the guys that I'm going to highlight, have seen them play live, have read a ton about them, descriptions, articles, and stuff like that. But I'm not going to give you I know exactly how this guy, the left tackle sets and what his biggest weaknesses are. I know some of them, but I'm not going to ever display myself. I'm a fan, first and foremost. And I honestly think these draft experts who, hold this title above everyone else of I'm so good, I know what's going on, these guys honestly suck. They're basically weather reporters. They just hope that it's right. They think that it could be right eventually, and they get clapped on the back when they get one weird pick right. And it's like, dude, you said the best player in the draft that everyone agreed on was going to be really good, and you missed on 4 other dudes. So I haven't ever really invested a ton of, character into doing mock drafts, which is why I don't plan on doing one today. What I really, really want to focus on is what guys out there are good, what are concerns, what are some of the advantages to drafting them, because I think there's a lot of misnomers out there in the way that they frame the NFL draft that these people don't really, what's the best way to put it, don't really understand the words that they're using. Sometimes they use low ceiling, high ceiling, low floor, high floor, but they don't ever really explain what that means in the context. And I kind of want to get through some of that. Also talk about team needs. I have talked to a few different people about, hey, what's your opinion on the draft? One of my buddies, funny way of meeting him, maybe there'll be a story for another time, Chance Trombley. He's an Eagles guy. He's a lot more invested into their culture. I'm a Lions guy, but he knows a lot about them, so I asked some questions to him to give me some insight. And if you ever want to give insight on anything on the podcast, feel free to reach out on the Anchor app. Feel free to reach out to me on YouTube, in the comments, in my DMs on Twitter, K Corner Podcast, where you can get all this content. So, starting off here, as we're already a bit of the way in, sorry I was talking for so long, but the Jacksonville Jaguars, what do they need? Honestly, I think they're closer to being a decent team than a lot of people think. Last year, obviously, there was so much going on behind the scenes that this organization just couldn't function. And it's not even like they didn't have some decent players. They performed so far below where they should have, and it's really not that surprising. Urban Meyer is quite literally a dumpster fire of a person. I don't want anyone ever bringing him up around. He's a decent person. He knows what he's doing. He could recruit well at Ohio State. He had a really good offensive coordinator that has basically done the exact same thing. The fact that he is back at OSU is honestly kind of disgusting. But that's neither here nor there, I guess. We'll move on to Jacksonville. They picked up a lot of free agents. So what is their needs? They did extend a franchise tag on their left tackle. I still wouldn't be surprised if they ended up going a tackle here. Ike Ekwonu, Evan Neal, O-linemen from Alabama who are big and kind of in that frame always sort of go here. He may not be the most polished or the best guy, but he definitely provides some value. Ike Ekwonu is, for the most part, been regarded as the number one tackle prospect for a little while now, so I'd be surprised if they went with anyone else. But with that being said, I also wouldn't be surprised if they went the defensive line of the ball here. Aiden Hutchinson, Kayvon Thibodeaux, a lot of talk around Travon Walker. I'm going to kind of get into who I think would be good fits for them and why maybe some of these, draft rumors that came out. So Travon Walker obviously played internal and external D-line. He didn't really rush the passer a lot. He used a lot of stunts. Switches. He was really good at pressing into gaps, disrupting the run game. And when you look at who the Jaguars have drafted, they have Josh Allen, not the quarterback for the Bills, but the outside linebacker / edge rusher from Kentucky. They also have Clavon Chaisson. Both those guys are number one draft picks, and both of those guys are already on the edge. So they've already invested heavily into the edge. There's no really good quarterback, and they don't need one. They took one last year, and it's going to be one of those positions. So Travon Walker being, everyone's like, oh, it's a very risky pick. He has a super low floor and a high ceiling. And I think that's just a misunderstanding on what that means. As a pass rusher, yes, I would agree that he isn't yet developed. He didn't produce in college. But as a run stopper, as a versatile defender, he's already here. Like, he can't bust really as a prospect. Maybe he never becomes the guy, and as a number one draft pick, maybe you want him to become a 13-sack guy. But 100% chance that this guy's going to be an excellent run defender. He's going to be able to run in multiple fronts. He's versatile. He can give you depth in multiple positions. He can make other guys around him better because he's such a freak athlete. He can even drop into coverage if you need him to. He didn't do it a whole lot at Georgia, but there's film out there. So when everyone's like, oh, why would they go here? It's like, if you look at it, it isn't that crazy. They already have 2 high selections at the DN position. They don't need another pure pass rusher on the edge necessarily. They need a guy that gives them versatility, that can make their defense more unique, and give them overall a better attack, I guess you could say. But I also like protecting Trevor Lawrence. Maybe you have Cam Robinson for 1 year and maybe he resigns for 4, but it's never a bad idea to set up your quarterbacks, especially with how bad of a year it was last year and you're already investing so much in the wide receiver market. I mean, it'd really be a failure with all that investing if they decided to, let's draft the receiver early, even in the first 2 rounds. Probably 4th round maybe to add some depth, but I'd be incredibly surprised if they reached for a receiver in the 2nd round. And really their only needs are offensive tackle and edge rusher, and this is because they spent so much in free agency. So it's really about whether you get the tackle now or the edge rusher at the beginning of the 2nd round, and there's way more depth at the edge rusher position that you can still get a very unique, very skilled guy into the 2nd round. And so overall, I would probably say that the Jacksonville's best bet is get the best lineman available, protect your quarterback, pick up a 2nd round guy who has some things to work on, maybe like a David Ojabo. I'm a Michigan guy, so I'm a little biased, but you're not looking to win this year. And you're looking to be mediocre, move up, win some games, develop and establish a culture there, but you're not necessarily looking to develop a winner right away. So maybe that would be someone that you can invest in a bit later. So that's Jacksonville. They do have a handful of picks. Their top picks are 1, 33, 65, and 70. They could add some backside depth when it comes to DBs, maybe even a linebacker in the second or third round, but they really need to get better in the trenches. And that's where this team didn't necessarily invest as much as you'd want them to, but something that they can definitely grow into in the upcoming season. Next up are the Lions. So there's a lot of needs here, but one of the things that people consistently get wrong is they need a quarterback. No, they don't. Jared Goff is a former Pro Bowler. Granted, that was in a Sean McVay scheme with run-heavy options, play-action passes, simple first-read passes with a good receiving crew around him. But that's also like what? You're going to wait 2 years on Malik Willis to develop, and I just don't see the Lions going quarterback in the first round. I'd be entirely shocked, and I don't think it's necessarily the right decision for the org because you invested in Jared Goff. Literally at the end of the season, he was playing decent football, and if at the end of the day you don't show that you can trust him, then maybe you don't, but next year you still have him under contract. If he sucks again this year, you're going to get another really good draft pick in a much better draft class. You're going to have 2 picks next year again. The Rams are probably going to fall off. You're going to have it. It just doesn't make much sense for them to go quarterback. They do need an edge rusher. They do need DBs, and they do need wide receivers. Their wide receiving core isn't necessarily hemorrhaging as much as it once was with, St. Brown really coming out and them signing DJ Chark, but there isn't a whole lot of long-term longevity that you'd be necessarily looking for. So with number 2, it's basically between Hutch and Thibodeau. Thibodeau has reportedly done a great job, and everyone's kind of enamored with him in the organization. I think that if I had the option, I would probably go Thibodeau. So again, with the high floor, high ceiling discussion, Aiden Hutchinson right now in the league can be a productive run stopper. Now people be like, well, his pass rush is very definitive. No. When a guy has short arms and isn't necessarily super bendy off the edge, what ends up happening a lot is that those edge rushers have super productive college seasons because they're much stronger than the tackles and some of the guys are going to, and they end up getting kind of caught up in the muck, which means that these linemen who have super long arms are able to get their paws on them consistently, and because he can't reach back or take the hit and then bend around the edge anyway through the contact, that these guys sometimes they have productive seasons but not great seasons at the NFL level. With that being said, he has a very high floor as a player just because he's so good at run stopping. And then on the exact opposite edge is Thibodeau is the prototypical extreme athlete at the edge. When he's healthy, he can bend with any of them. He's super team oriented. He has a high motor. Another correction. I think that on Aiden Hutchinson, that because he's a white football player, and I'll say this without any doubt of mind, I think people shoehorn white players specifically into high energy, high motor guys, high IQ. Now, while I think he has a super high IQ, watch the film on him. Aiden Hutchinson routinely jogs when he doesn't think he can chase someone down, and the guy ends up breaking 2 more tackles. He routinely doesn't invest himself in the pile on plays. He routinely works in. Well, let's put it this way: when Kenneth Walker ran for 5 touchdowns, 3 of them were because Aiden Hutchinson wasn't immediately involved into the play, and he got bounced on contain. Or 2 of the touchdowns for sure, maybe a third. But Connor Hayward, a 6th-round former running back who was too chubby to play running back, ended up being converted to a halfback tight end role, blocked him really, really efficiently. And you just see it sometimes that he gets lackadaisical. He hops around. He doesn't necessarily finish plays consistently. And I just think he gets shoehorned into high competitor, high leverage player. Now, he is a great leader. He established culture at Michigan. I'm not disagreeing with that, but I just think that that's a bad draft profile. It's lazy. It happens a lot throughout sports because media members are idiots in the most part. But that's neither here nor there. Thibodeaux is a great prospect. He has the bend. He has the strength. He was a high prospect coming out of the draft, out of high school. And he's kind of always shown it. Now, he doesn't have counter moves to the way that Hutchinson does. He doesn't have in and outs. He doesn't effectively translate all of his moves together, and he isn't great in the run game, where it's about leverage more, and he hasn't quite figured it out because he's always been piercing defenses instead of using his leverage, finding the play, then attacking. So he sometimes gets pushed out on plays and also stalls pass rushes because his first and maybe his only move doesn't work, but he has the athletic profile of someone who has a super high ceiling. If I were the Lions, you're not looking for a run stuffing, short term, he's going to immediately perform. You're looking for a guy who maybe takes a year or two in the league and then ends up being this high-level pass rusher who's beating everyone. And Thibodeaux has a chip on his shoulder. From everything that I've seen from the draft process with what all the media is saying, he's pissed off a bit. I would personally go him here. I think the Lions have a bunch of good routes they can go, but it'll definitely be defense here, and it'll definitely probably be front seven. Now, outside of that, they have the number 32 pick from the Rams, the number 34 pick. It'll be interesting to see what they do here. They can always package those and move up in the draft if they want to get a cornerback. Cornerback is a need. They did draft Jeff Okudah, third overall behind Chase Young in 2020's draft. He's played a total of 7 games. Not ideal, obviously. So maybe they're a little scared to draft that, but I wouldn't at all be surprised if the Lions go with a safety or a cornerback here. The cornerback room might be depleted by this time, so Louis Cine, Daxton Hill, Jalen Petrie are all really good options. Jalen Petrie is a guy who played a similar role to Daxton Hill. They played man cover on tight ends and in the slot often, and also played a little roaming deep safety. This is something that the Lions need desperately. They need more depth just to begin with, so getting anyone here is vital. But these guys can kind of cover, and Louis Cine is kind of a more prototypical, put him along the box, let him fire down in the backfield and cover on the deep side, the deep ends. He isn't really a man in the slot guy. Now that isn't bad. It's just basically what you want. And a big thing that I want to kind of clarify here is some people are, when they're watching the draft, they're like, oh, this player is so much better than this player. Why did this guy go first, or why did this guy go first? Especially on the defensive side of the ball, you're worried about schemes. So some teams run a 4-3. So you have a D tackle, or 2 D tackles, 2 D ends. And they're basically all their hands are in the dirt. You have 3 linebackers. There's what's being played more often now is a 4-2-5. So you only have 2 linebackers and 5 DBs to provide the extra protection in the pass game. But you really want to stuff the run. And so you run the 4-3/4-2-5. So some players are really good with their hand in the dirt. They're strong enough to jump inside sometimes internally, and sometimes they're really just edge players. So they're playing in a 3-4, and they're really an outside linebacker, but as a pure pass rusher. So this is kind of the times where you'd see them drop into coverage afterwards. They're not going to be as dominant in the run game. They usually get blocked at sometimes because these guys are smaller, extremely quick, powerful, burst off the edge. There's a guy in this draft, Nick Bonito, that very, This is a T. He's from Oklahoma. We'll talk to him a little later. But that is something that's important, is that you can't frame everything of, well, this is a better player, this is a better player. I mean, there's often times where guys are drafted into the wrong position. So you can't draft a cover corner who's played primarily in the slot and expect him to play too deep 25 yards away from the ball consistently. That wouldn't make sense for your team. It wouldn't make sense for the player. Now, maybe you think that he can adjust, but that's something that's super important to take care of here. And the reason why I think the Lions wouldn't look Travon Walker here if he goes, or if he doesn't go number 1 overall, and they'd probably prefer Thibodeaux or Hutch, is only because they talked about going to a more 4-3 front, which both of these guys are much more familiar with, and kind of shines a light on who they would go with. They do need a receiver eventually. There's a lot of good receivers in this draft. I would expect that to be the 34th pick. They do have 66 and 97. 97 is a tight end avenue for the Lions. They don't have much depth. Didn't have much depth last year, especially when Hockenson went down. Is like guys who didn't even have names playing, that weren't even part of the organization at the start of the year. So that's always a concern. You can also expect them to eventually go linebacker. I think they're okay with where they're at now. Harrison Bryant is a guy they drafted last year, and then they brought back Alex Anzalone. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if they kind of stay with them, check out the market next year. But they definitely need to go with the wide receiver. I'll talk about the wide receiver class in a little bit. Next up are the Texans. Team needs quarterback. No, they don't. Davis Mills played well last year. I think that people are blowing it out of proportion. Some organizations, especially like PFF, they're like, oh, just keep drafting quarterbacks. And it's like, okay, but if you draft a quarterback and invest it for 2 years, when they don't produce at all, and maybe they're on the bench behind a starter, they give no value to your team. A backup cornerback can get 300, 400, 500 snaps, maybe get a few picks, maybe a pick once a year. A backup quarterback provides zero value for your team. And it doesn't make sense for a team to, I guess, invest in that consistently, because there's so many other areas that you need to be good. I mean, you've seen teams that don't know how to invest, don't know how to take care of their quarterbacks, and they spend 5 years being terrible with them. That guy leaves and is good, and everyone's like, what? He just couldn't figure it out there. And it's like, no, that's not how any of this works. God. So they do have number 3. It's their own pick. O-line or D-line or Kyle Hamilton. Those are really the only avenues. We talked about Hutch, Walker, Thibodeaux. Any of those guys are there. They need help basically everywhere along their team. If Hamilton is there, this would be a place you can get a guy that doesn't need to perform well. Just get a staple of your defense. Now, obviously, safety isn't as valued as other positions, but he can play a few. I don't know if he can be a true slot guy that lines up, but he definitely can play a linebacking position, so some positional versatility there. But I would probably say edge rusher or tackle, protect Davis Mills, try to invest. They also have 13. One of these should go to offense, one of these should go to defense. The offense isn't going to be where you want it to be. The defense is going to be where you want it to be. You didn't spend in free agency. You didn't invest in free agency to really do anything. So it doesn't matter if we're going to really bolster our offense. Wait, so that's just going to mean you're going to have more people that you have to pay by the time it comes up on one side of the ball. Literally split your investments. It's about getting best player available right now. You're not worried about positional fit, value, scheme as much as other teams are, but I definitely want to invest in a quarterback probably at all this year. Your picks are too valuable to put a guy behind when your first pick last year was a quarterback. You can't double up this year and really shouldn't even touch it. See what you have with Davis Mills. If not, you're drafting at the back end of the draft next year. I think a lot of the problem with a lot of these draft experts that know exactly the right way for these teams to draft is they look at everything from a year-to-year basis instead of looking at things as a grand scheme. Like, we're pulling decisions for 3 to 4 years from now. We're not worried about 20 minutes from now. I need to make a winning decision. That's not how these teams work, because they're literally printing presses for these billionaires who already own the team. Now, they want to eventually win because more people come, more merchandise and stuff. But it isn't like, oh, we need another quarterback. No, we got Davis Mills, it's a really good story. Number one guy, got injured, played at Stanford, was really good, third-round draft pick. Now you can leverage that. And you can leverage that you're bringing some guys back from injury and that you should be invested. And maybe you get a running back in the second round. This is really the team that I see at 37 that Breece Hall, yeah, that's his name, Breece Hall or Kenneth Walker go to. I'm partial to Kenneth Walker. He killed Michigan. He has the next gear and has the cutting consistently that you just love to see an NFL back. And you get a 1-2 punch, but it should definitely go 3 or 13, switch between offense or defense, get a high-key, high-level player at 37, 68 and 80. I mean, just find depth at all of your positions. They're not going to look to be exceptional players right away. They're going to be able to ease their way into the system. So just get guys. I mean, it doesn't matter who's the best guy on the board. Who do you like most? I mean, that's up to them. There's not a position they don't need. So the Jets, the 4th and 10 picks here, I really like about the Jets is how they're building out their offense. Not only are they looking at their team in an inside-out fashion, but what's the best way to put it? They know what they need. Now, if Thibodeau's here, I think he gets snatched up instantaneously. I just read a report that Mekhi Becton didn't show up for camp, and maybe this is just them maybe looking to trade away this pick and getting future value. But it sounds like they may be looking at a tackle here because Mekhi Becton might not return to the team or ever play with them again. He's skipping OTAs after coming back from a super long and exaggerated injury history. Evan Neal, Ike Ekwonu, any of these guys are basically available for them. I wouldn't be surprised if they go offensive, but I think this is a trench decision. A lot of people love a Derek Stingley, Kyle Hamilton, Ahmed Gardner, Sauce Gardner. I like all those players, but just not here for the Jets. They have a pick at 10 as well, and one of those guys will most likely fall to them. So Carolina Panthers, this team is interesting let's just say for a few reasons. First off, what the hell? I'm trying to find 1 second. Okay. First off, they don't have a lot of draft picks. Last year, getting Sam Darnold, acquiring Sam Darnold took a lot of capital. So their only big draft pick is 6th year. And Matt Rule's coaching for his job. He's coaching for his future. I think he has 1 year after this on his contract. So, I mean, cut him and rebuild. I would be incredibly surprised if they take a quarterback here. Now, everyone's like, oh, why not take a quarterback? I mean, eventually you got to find a quarterback. I agree. Eventually you have to find a quarterback that... Oh, I skipped right over the Giants. 1 second. Oh, no, we'll keep going and we'll bounce right back. Eventually, you have to find a quarterback. I know. But you can't find a quarterback when your offensive line looks like that. When you have no draft capital, and then you'd have to hit on this quarterback. And what I've looked into the draft history, you do not want to reach for a quarterback. Blake Bortles, reach. Jake Locker, reach. All these guys that we were like, oh, there's decent college quarterbacks, and they're immediately thrust into the spotlight. They had to be go-to guys. They all fizzled out. They weren't good. They didn't know how to play, and they were never worth that draft value. And Carolina needs to get an offensive lineman. If Christian McCaffrey isn't healthy, this team's going to suck anyway. He has way too much capital invested into him to not be healthy. So if he's healthy, you get a road grader offensive lineman to help him. If you do that, guess what? If you get a road grader offensive lineman, your run game is good. Christian McCaffrey can get there. You have Chuba Hubbard behind him. Your offense is actually pretty good around them, and Sam Darnold can be a guy that just gets the ball out. You don't ask a lot for him. It's run heavy, play action pass. You Indianapolis Colts this. And then eventually you try to get another backup in the second round. But Charles Cross, Ikem Ekwonu, Evan Neal, these are the only people that are acceptable here. Their receiving core is decently good, but I can't imagine them reaching for a quarterback that would have to immediately perform after they just did that last year, got entirely burned by and wasting too much draft. Now, let's say they get Sam Darnold for a third-round pick last year, which is all he was probably worth. Then I would say, yeah, you can take a quarterback here, but they traded a second, a third, and another third or something crazy like that. Like, they invested way too much. So, moving on to the Giants, skip them. Their first pick is probably going to be in the trenches. They need to protect Daniel Jones. They've talked about protecting and staying with and loving Daniel Jones. Now, they're in a prime place here if the tackles all haven't gone and, Houston goes DB, Jets go DB, and no one really goes tackles to trade back. The reason being is they don't have enough money in cap space to sign people unless they cut James Bradbury at these two spots. So it'll be interesting to see what they end up doing here. But if they do keep the pick, it has to be a tackle. Their 7th pick should be somewhere on the defense. I wouldn't be surprised if they go with a pass rusher like Jermaine Johnson, which I watched some decent amount of film. He's a really good backer that really, his hands are so strong. He has such a good punch. He isn't necessarily great bender, great at getting off the ball, but his punch, man, like the way he can disrupt offensive linemen is incredible, and it's why he's been flying up draft boards. But I'd see trenches on both these draft picks. They've invested in the wide receiver room last year. They could go safety at one of these picks, but I'd expect them at probably 36 to grab one of the later safeties. That's Dax Hill, Jalen Petrie, one of those guys. And if they can't get either any of them, then a second-round linebacker is what I'd expect these guys to do. Now, I'm not saying this is the full draft breakdown, but these teams do have needs, and that usually comes up. Everyone's like, oh, just draft best available. No, these teams usually try and fix their problems. We did Carolina Panthers. We are going to keep moving along in this process. So after the Panthers, it's the Bears again. We talked about them. After the Falcons here, this could be a place where the quarterback gets drafted, a Malik Willis, to basically do Mariota. We're sorry, you don't have any receivers to throw to. We're really just having you get beat. Our offensive line isn't very good. Everyone who invested in that isn't good. Our edge defense isn't very good. Our defensive backs are fair. And you have Kyle Pitts, so do your best. Oh, you also have Cordero Patterson out of the backfield. But this is one of those places where they can do anything and not really be in a wrong spot because they're not looking to win this year. They have no one really at quarterback. They have a new coaching staff, so they can just take their time and kind of spread their arms out and make a slow process decision. I wouldn't be surprised if they go wide receiver here. I wouldn't be surprised if the tackles weren't gone yet. They got tackles. This is one of those picks that they could also trade back because they have so many needs in their team. But other than that, the Falcons are in just a rough spot overall for their organization, that they can do a bunch of different things here, and all of it makes sense. They can even go edge here if they wanted to. That's how bad this team is. Moving on, we have Seattle. So Seattle is in a really weird situation. They were winning for a long time, weren't even necessarily awful last year. If Russell Wilson's healthy all year, they might make the playoffs and might really compete. That division's really tough, though. Everyone's kind of set up for the next few years, and I don't see them reaching for a quarterback here. That's not necessarily what Pete Carroll would want. That is a rebuilding move, and he's old as shit. So I wouldn't be surprised if they add a receiver, if they go defensive lineman, depending on how it is. One of the defensive linemen that I really liked, let's see if I can pull it up here. Ooh, this might be like a George Karlaftis. Seattle had a really big problem stopping the run, and George Karlaftis is one of those guys who's so strong and so good at a few different things that I wouldn't be surprised if they looked at him and were like, yeah, this is the guy that we kind of want to build a front seven around, because they've lost so many guys over the last few years to the draft. Sorry, I got it set up now so I can see the big board. So that's kind of where I'd go if I were Seattle. I think that there's a few different guys, like a George Karlaftis here if a lot of guys are gone. If not, they could probably also settle for a tackle. They could go receiver here. With a guy like DK Metcalf, you wouldn't want like a Jameson Williams necessarily. That's kind of like doubling up, but like having a really, really nice like sailboat and then having a yacht, like they both kind of do the same job, just in like completely different ways. Like they're both deep threats. They're going to take the top off the defense. You would see someone like a Chris Olave. No, probably more like a Garrett Wilson, actually. I'm going to correct myself, because Olave is another deep threat, and Garrett Wilson is more of an intermediate run after the catch. That's what you want, is a guy that you can get quick, consistent balls to. Jets, again, we already talked about both of their draft picks. Washington Commanders, they're in an interesting position because not only did they trade away way too much and take on way too much of Carson Wentz's contract, they have holes like significantly that we didn't know they necessarily had, especially on the defensive side of the ball. We thought their defense was going to be one of the top in 2020. Or 2021, Jesus. And they actually really struggled. Chase Young going down and not performing really for the first few months definitely hurt. But just overall, it was a poor performance from that group. So they could go one of the safeties here. They could go with a wide receiver to pair up with Terry McLaurin. He's more of a technician. This would be like a Chris Olave or a Jameson Williams type. Now, the move to get Carson Wentz in, and him being injury prone as he is, and Terry being a little bit beat up, I'd be incredibly surprised if they went with a receiver who already had a pre-existing injury. But a guy who could take the absolute helmet off of the defense, like a Chris Olave, I wouldn't be surprised. And they also went with like a bigger body receiver like Drake London or Treylon Burks. That could be a good complement to Terry McLaurin, a guy that can operate both inside and outside, but isn't necessarily an X-receiver phenotype. And then you get a bigger-bodied receiver, especially around the red zone where Carson Wentz struggled. That would be a good idea. And a guy that can fight for contested balls, because Carson Wentz loves heaving footballs just magically into the air, hoping they find someone. Later in the draft, they can go with Devin Lloyd if he's still available, but 47 would probably be linebacking or safety if they go offensive side of the ball here. Minnesota Vikings. This one has been projected a million times. If Derek Stingley's there, they want to go there. The DB's coach at Minnesota was his defensive coordinator at LSU. He's going to be back in the purple and gold. It's just an erroneous thing. It doesn't actually matter. But I think overall, Minnesota is a really good fit for him because there's not high expectations of them winning. It's probably not this year that we're going to see them compete for a division title. But what we could see is maybe... what's the best way to put it? Maybe in 2 years now, when Derek Stingley kind of reestablishes himself, takes a break, takes a load off, we could see him and we could kind of realize that this guy was the best cornerback in the draft. I also talked about if Sauce Gardner hasn't been picked here, I wouldn't be surprised. It kind of depends on how everything falls. I wouldn't be surprised if people went tackle heavy. I wouldn't be surprised if people went receiver heavy, edge heavy, and the cornerbacks kind of fall. But Sauce Gardner, if someone traded up to get, I wouldn't be surprised either. I'm sorry about that. I was trying to pause it. But moving forward, we still have Houston's second pick. We talked about that. Baltimore. This is a team who lost some pass rushers, was going to get Zadarius or Smith maybe, and he went somewhere else. It really sucks when you look overall at this organization, how many injuries they suffered from last year, mostly because, like, how did they have that many secondary injuries? I can't believe it. What we kind of saw that last year. I know this podcast has been stretching out. We are currently at number 14, the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens have a few different directions to go. There's so many good players in this draft that every time I look, I just realize how ridiculous it is. And what I'm thinking is that Baltimore can go edge here. They can go cornerback depth. They did have a bunch of injuries at cornerback, so it doesn't necessarily they have to go there, but they have 3 dudes coming back from injury in the secondary, so adding depth, especially how everything went last year, makes sense. Getting a better pass rush. They have Odafe Owe out of Penn State that had a pretty decent 4 sacks last year, and did a good job getting pressure on the quarterback. And he's looking to take a huge step forward as he's a much younger guy. Moving on from what else they can do, wide receivers not out of the realm of possibilities. Making Lamar Jackson's job as easy as possible is always something that they should be trying to do over there. But the Baltimore Ravens are in a good position because they had one of those years where they were a much better team than kind of how their record reflected. And because of that, they get a prime draft spot here at 14, and if they can invest in the right ways and get good players, they can really catapult this team into dominating, especially, I mean, obviously we know the Bengals are going to be the team to beat. The Browns are going to have Deshaun Jackson now, but he may be missing a handful of games, and then you have the Steelers, and so there's obviously going to be at least a 2-way competition for first place between the Ravens and them, and no one else really has draft capital in this division at any good mark because everyone but the Browns made the playoffs, and the Browns traded away their first-round draft pick. So the Baltimore needs to do a good job here in investing, getting a player. So this is one of those players. They want an impact player. So if you want a guy like Jordan Davis, you want to like beef up that interior, you're going against really good rushing offenses, and you need a guy that can stop it. That would be a guy you could go after. Another guy that isn't getting enough buzz that's on the defensive interior is Jordan Davis's teammate, Devontae Wyatt. He is an interior guy that played better out of Jordan Davis than him. He was able to run, wreak havoc on games. He was explosive in games. He had he was second in the team in sacks behind the linebackers. I mean, this guy was really, really good. He showed out at the Senior Bowl, and the best way to also put it is like he's going to be able to be a guy that develops. Jordan Davis is one of those guys that's already kind of at his baseline as a run stopper, and Devontae Wyatt has proven he can do both. And this is a guy that can grow with your young team but also make an immediate impact because he has that body. Where Jordan Davis is going to be a run stopper, but is he going to do anything else for you? A guy like Nick Bonito probably won't go this high, but is someone that you want to watch the Ravens to draft just because they do need edge help if they don't go right away. We'll be moving on here to the Eagles, and I asked my good friend Chance to help me out and give me some good Eagles info, and I was like, hey, having a podcast tonight, wondering what you want them to do with their first 2 picks. So obviously they originally had 3 picks, traded them away for future draft picks, keep building investments. Three picks in one draft is sometimes detrimental to your team. First off, you have to pay everyone when their rookie contracts come up, which is stressful. And at the same time, how often do you hit on 3 guys? So they have 2 first-round draft picks. Chance said, I expect a wide receiver and a DB tomorrow. He also phrased the situation. He's like, the vibe is kind of nervous because we picked wrong on the right position so frequently lately. I'm talking about Jalen Reagor, talking about a bunch of different players. What they have right now at receiver is Devonta Smith. Devonta Smith is one of those guys who wins quickly, instantly, and all the time. That helps Jalen Hurts, but this team isn't necessarily built on throwing the ball downfield. But I asked him who'd he like. He said Jameson Williams or Chris Olave, guys that can be deep threats. A different kind of way to look at their offense. Would be able to stretch the ball down the field a lot more. Especially with the way that they run it, and especially the way that they can move different guys around. Having a guy that can stretch the field like either of those two would be a huge benefit. He also talked about Stingley, but I think by now Stingley will most likely be gone, if not early in the top 5, definitely by the time he hits Minnesota. Trent McDuffie, he said, is a guy that's rumored, but the problem is Trent McDuffie doesn't necessarily have the length that you'd want. He's 5'11", a little bit on the shorter end, and this might be one of those picks where you get a young guy to, big play, say Darius Slay. You set up on the opposite, a younger guy that can make mistakes because you have such a great corner. Maybe a guy with a little bit more upside. Looking at the cornerback room, 1 second. I'm going to get us there eventually. Looking at the cornerback room outside of Derek Stingley, Gardner, McDuffie is one of those guys, but he just doesn't have the length. Andrew Booth might be a guy that you like, but another one of these guys is Kaiir Elam. So Elam has everything that's typical of what you'd want a long, rangy corner to be, and he did it in the SEC, and there was at times when he was competing with the LSU receivers and these other guys where he was nose-to-nose with them, and that's something that you kind of love and really appreciate. And the same is with Roger McCreary, and I think the lack of length with Roger McCreary is going to bite him in the butt and pushes him deep into the second round. But if you're going with a guy like Trent McDuffie, who played in a much easier conference to defend, being in the Pac-12, that if you're going to get a guy that has no length, you may as well go with the more skilled, more competitive player. Outside of that, it'd be interesting to see what they kind of go. There are rumors, Chance said, hey, they may even trade up to get one of those elite cornerbacks with 2 of them. And I've also heard that it may be a deal that, hey, they pick up Debo because they have so many draft assets, maybe a first this year and next year because they have 2. Moving on from the Eagles, I'd be surprised if they went linebacker here. I know I've heard people say, oh, they definitely need to go linebacker. The linebacking crew really sucks, and it's like, yeah, they probably do, but you can't go linebacker in a situation where you have so many needs at other key positions and your linebackers are just okay. That would maybe be like a 51 pick, which is still really high in the draft, or maybe even 83. You chance. Drake London would be an interesting guy to go to this team if he isn't already off the board, just because his length opposite of Devontae Smith's frame gives a reliable pass catcher, and Jalen Hurts can use his escapability to find contested catch king that he is. Moving on from the Eagles' 2 draft picks, we have to look at the Saints team who traded up, and this is actually the Colts' old pick. And the Saints came up here, and this probably It's difficult to say. The Saints obviously have a lot of needs. Some people were mocking a quarterback. I think they really like Jameis, but they need playmakers. And as much as that defense needs depth, I can't imagine them going anywhere here other than on the offensive side of the ball, whether that is offensive line or wide receiver. And I'm leaning that it depends on where the draft pushes. If the draft pushes more wide receivers, they have to get a wide receiver that's elite, that can win. Someone opposite, in the same way that the Eagles need guys that can stretch the field, so do the Saints. If Michael Thomas comes back, and they have Kamara, they have guys that can catch the ball 5 yards and under on the depth chart. But Jameis has a big arm. He has a strong arm. And if they want to win with him at the quarterback position, they got to be able to stretch the field to open up the possibilities for him to be maybe a little inaccurate underneath. And that defense has been consistent anyway. So these two picks are going to be offensive defensive split, probably D-line and probably receiver is how this would most likely split. Next up, we have the Chargers. This is going to be, depending on the tackles, they won't go receiver here. When you look at who the Chargers are, they've never really been a team. What's the best way to put it? They've never really been a team that's invested early in wide receivers. They have the 79th pick, which is perfectly okay to grab a receiver, but it'll be interesting to see if they may take a leap on a tackle like a Trevor Penning or the guy out of CMU, where they really take a leap because they really want to protect Justin Herbert, or they go defensive and really load up. They need defensive tackles. They got some investments, but they need a younger guy in there to really mix it up, and they need another cornerback and add depth to that secondary. Other than that, they're pretty well managed, and they'd only need a receiver to add depth. They don't need another receiver. They got some winners. They got some guys that can develop, but they may need one later. But it'll be interesting to see how these Chargers approach this part of the draft, because there's Philadelphia Eagles, Saints, them, Philadelphia Saints again. It's an interesting combination where they're sandwiched, between these two teams. And that ends up being very interesting for them, because they might have a prime position if Philadelphia takes, Philadelphia and Saints take two receivers and the Chargers don't necessarily need a receiver. They could, fall back, and this would leave Philadelphia and New Orleans, who both need cornerbacks, and the Chargers but they may be able to shoehorn some of these teams that need it more than them. We already talked about Philly and New Orleans secondary picks. We're moving on to the Steelers. The Steelers, this is where another quarterback can go, and where I truly think they got Mitch Trubisky, that hey, you had a Pro Bowl once. This offensive line is awful. You're a bit more athletic than anyone we have currently in camp. We have some receivers on the outside that are decent, maybe not where you want to be. We have a solid tight end group. Our defense could be here or there. They were inconsistent last year, but this is where it would be you guys aren't trying to win this year. I know Mike Tomlin has never had a losing season, and with expanded playoffs, non-losing seasons can get you in, but they need to get more skillful at a handful of positions. The line, they did invest in some guards, but I wouldn't be surprised if they invest again there. And one of the other positions is linebacker, defensive tackle, safety. I mean, they have some good players, but they have a lot of depth pieces, and it was one of those teams that kind of just weirdly squeaked into the playoffs that no one even really knew how. New England, this is prime candidate for trading back. They always trade back. Their first round draft picks actually blow chunks consistently. I'd be surprised if they go wide receiver, although they need help there. Even after getting Devontae Parker from the Dolphins, I would be on the lookout for them getting a cornerback or Nakobe Dean. The reason why: they lost Kyle Van Noy, Who else? Oh, and they traded Chase Winovich, who technically both played outside linebacker, but they were slow at the linebacker position. And Nakobe Dean is the exact opposite of that. And he can run sideline to sideline. He's faster than most offensive players. He chased down a fully healthy Blake Corum last year. If any of you watch Michigan, I mean, that guy's fast. He ran away from a lot of defenses last year, and Nakobe Dean tracked him down pretty easily, I'd say. That defensive unit as a whole for Georgia is just nasty. They're going to have 7 or 8 guys drafted from them, and Jermaine Johnson, another edge that can go in this draft, is actually a former Georgia guy, which ends up being hilarious because he was a former Georgia guy, transferred to Florida State, and he's still going to be incredibly dominant at the next level. So New England probably trading out. Don't be surprised if they go possibly D-tackle, possibly linebacker here. Next up are the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers are a team looking for a receiver, but they've never really drafted a first-round receiver. There are needs for their team. They need tackle. They need some edge rushers, but they have the 22nd, 28th, 53rd, 59th. If the 22nd or 28th pick aren't a receiver, I'd be surprised. Now, a George Pickens is exactly who Green Bay loves. Big, strong, fast, highly touted, can block on the edge, aggressive in the run game. That's who they go to. And if Green Bay drafts receiver at either of these two draft picks, that's who they would go after. I see these guys wanting smaller slot receivers, like a Jahan Dotson or a Chris Olave. First off, I don't think Olave will be around by then, but that's not who Green Bay drafts ever. They all like big, fast, strong guys. And they also need probably a tackle or an edge. If the edge class is much deeper and they need more help there overall than their line. And it depends on how it all unfolds because the tackles aren't as deep as the edge position, but they have overall much more impactful guys at the first 5, but not through the first 10, if that makes sense. So Green Bay Packers organization has to do something they haven't done, and this is a good thought experiment. If Green Bay, in the 2020 draft, when they went, traded draft capital to move up in the draft and get Jordan Love, if they got a lineman there, a linebacker there, or a wide receiver there, they'd be in a better position. And then in the second round, if they didn't get A.J. Dillon, a backup running back at the time that's still splitting carries, this team probably wins a championship. And them thinking around with Aaron Rodgers is just bad for both sides. And on another note, Aaron Rodgers' salary makes it feasibly impossible for them to win a championship because they can't add enough depth with his contract being that foreboding. And that's just the truth of it. So moving on, the Cardinals. The Cardinals in the last 2 drafts have drafted linebackers of all positions back to back. Isaiah Simmons is supposed to be a safety, linebacker, edge, all-in-one combination, and he's been terrible. The guy they drafted last year, I can't even remember his name. Gosh, I know his name, but he was pretty bad. I'd be surprised if they invest another draft pick in the front 7, even after losing Chandler Jones, just because they invested J.J. Watt. They need help in the secondary. They need some guys who can cover. But again, this is a coach who's more than probably willing to just get another receiver. He's a pretty coach. He hasn't ever handled the extreme depths of a NFL season, and he needs help in the trenches. That's where this team should go. Cornerback or either side, or cornerback or offensive line. Kyler Murray can run for his life, but he's also 5'8". He's missed games in back-to-back seasons being injured. He has back-to-back Pro Bowls, but that's because Pro Bowls are a popularity contest for the most part. They need to get depth at the offensive line position and then a cornerback. They have picks at 23 and 55. If you can't get a tackle or a guard that's efficient, if you can't get one of those guys, invest in cornerback, because the DB room got burnt to shreds, and you're going up against what will now be a Rams offense that are loaded. You'll be going against Trey Lance whenever he gets put in. And you may not like it, but DK Metcalf is still really good, and is the reason why they didn't avoid the Rams in the first round of the playoffs. Moving on from there, we got the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys are looking at offensive line. They need to replace edge rushers. Secondary, in as much as a position, they're really ball happy, and they scheme up things so well. So to reiterate, the Dallas Cowboys are in prime position, to get someone. This is an offensive line draft and an edge rusher draft for them. They may need safety and may need to add depth in the wide receiver, but they can do that in the third, fourth rounds. What I'm looking for here is that Dallas absolutely has to kind of reinvent themselves. They had such a good O-line for so long that it kind of fell off in the last few years. You've seen Zeke's numbers go down. That's also because of injury, and he's getting older. He doesn't necessarily have that explosive burst. He's kind of always overweight. But don't at all be surprised if you see this team go Linderbaum on the inside or Kenyon Green, who's a guard out of Texas A&M. Now, Kenyon Green is a guy that can flip between tackle and guard, which provides depth for this Dallas roster. Linderbaum is probably just the center at this point. He still needs to add weight, but Kenyon Green is a nasty killer in the run game, and this is a guy that just fits perfectly. I've heard that they want to go tackle here, but I think all the useful tackles will be gone, and they'll most likely have to reach. That isn't really what Jerry Jones does in the draft. He kind of says who's the best player available. You saw this when they grabbed CeeDee Lamb a few years ago. They could have gone defensive back. They could have gone a few other places, and they're like, no, he's the best player. We're grabbing him. Moving on, Buffalo Bills, the Billingtons. They need to add depth at the cornerback position. They need to add depth at the defensive tackle, and they need an offensive lineman. So they have the 25th, 57th, and 89th pick. And this is where you could see that Andrew Booth and Kaiir Elam go if they don't get reached on. But one of the guys that I really like here, and a lot of times draft experts are like, oh, we don't see running backs. I think the general consensus is that still in these operating room with these analysts and these scouts, running backs are still a little bit more favored than in the general media. You saw this with the ETN going. You saw this, and it was kind of in this area where mid to late 20s and 30s running backs go. This would be a perfect place for Hall or... Wait, is his name Breece Hall or is it Bryce Love? If I've been saying this wrong this entire time, I may stab myself in the eye. And I think I may owe Mr. Keeney an apology. No, Breece Hall. Breece Hall. Okay. So Breece Hall, I was basically right. Bryce Hall, whatever. Who the fuck spells their name like Breece? Fucking idiots. But Breece Hall. So him being a pass catcher out of the backfield, him being a consistent running back and having proven production, although I like Kenneth Walker more, I wouldn't be surprised which way they go here. But this may be where a surprise running back kind of creeps up into the draft and people are like, who would have thought of this? You boy. There's not a ton of areas where Buffalo struggles in. And because of that, they can get creative in the draft. And sometimes it ends up hurting teams, but they haven't had a consistent run game since Josh Allen got there. And when the weather's cold and nasty, this might be where they go running back to get a guy like, hey, we have depth pieces. We've invested in the third and fourth rounds all these years. Let's go and invest a home run pick. We want to get the best guy available. I also think Kenneth Walker would be good here, but that's to each their own. They could also, like I said, go cornerback, but they had the best defense in the country. They added Von Miller. They're just like, there's so many routes that they can go. I wouldn't be surprised. Tennessee Titans. The Titans need to add defensive edge positions. Offensive line is getting old. And probably wide receiver. Now, A.J. Brown's agent, Debo's, and who is it? One other agent, or Terry McLaurin, all have the same agent. They're all asking for new contracts 3 years in, and they want to get it done before the end of their fourth year. That way they aren't going into their fifth year without having a contract under their belt. And we'll see how all of that kind of turns out. But they may have to go receiver here. And this is their area to win. This is the year to kind of put all the chips in. Tannehill's contract just ballooned, so he's eating up way too much for it to make sense to be able to invest in the free agency market and not go over the cap and get penalized and all the things that kind of come with it. And a wide receiver might be the play here. Now, they've missed on receivers before. Corey Davis hasn't really had a 1,000-yard season, didn't really blossom there, hasn't really been a huge playmaker. They hit on A.J. Brown, and this is maybe where they get a consistent pass catcher separator for Tannehill, a guy that they can consistently check down to. This would be a guy kind of like a Jahan Dotson, a guy that isn't. Some people are like, oh, they should get Jameson Williams. He's going to, change the way their offense runs. And it's like, yes, but their offense runs that way for a specific reason. It's because Tannehill sucks. Sky Moore might be a guy that would be really good here, where you pair a smaller bodied slot guy who can consistently get in and out of routes, that can be safety barriers, that can operate after the catch. After the catch is huge. John Mechie might be another guy. This would probably be way too big of a jump for him, just because John Mechie isn't, seen as this big of a receiver. But maybe at 90, they eventually stretches all the way out there. Another way that they could go is the offensive line. Taylor Lewan's old. Their other tackle's old. They have a younger guard, and they have a middle-aged center and left guard. But they could get younger there. They need to add some positional value. They need road graders that can pave the way for Derrick Henry play-action passing. And defensive line. They need some help in front seven overall with some of the misses on the draft pick. This has actually been a team that's missed on a ton of draft picks, but they've done a really good job of repurposing players later in their career. Eventually, we'll probably see them end up going tight end, because I think they only have one tight end that's really on their roster right now. But moving on from the Tennessee Bucks. Bucks are in win now mode. Don't be surprised if they grab a receiver. I know that sounds ridiculous. Why would you grab a first-round wide receiver? Well, Chris Godwin's still out injured, and maybe not their first pick, but at 60, don't at all be surprised if they go there. At 27, they can go offensive lineman. It depends on... A lot of this depends where the rest of the draft goes, because there's depth at 3 or 4 positions, and you don't know how it's going to kind of cascade down. But once you get past like the first 2 or 3 guards and the first 5 linemen, there's a huge drop-off in talent where there are no longer first-round prospects. So if all of the guards are gone, they can't do that. If all the edge rushers are gone, or edge rusher is probably the only position where you can really get into the second round and still have good quality playmakers that can eventually be starters. But this is where a safety can go. They grabbed Antoine Winfield early. They're going to be in a pass-happy division. And this might be, hey, we need to eventually slow down passing offenses and stuff in the postseason. And that's what you could see here. Tom Brady has made a ton out of nothing his entire career, so maybe you don't really focus on, adding offensive depth here, and you wait to get a guard maybe in the second round, or you shop a trade around for this pick, but it'll be interesting to see how it goes. Green Bay, we've talked about both their picks. Kansas City Chiefs, this is an important draft pick for the Kansas City. They lost a receiver, and they're so far down that don't be at all surprised if they package these picks and move up to get a receiver, a top-flight receiver, to help replace Tyreek Hill's production. Now, if they don't trade the picks, they need help in the secondary. This is where one of those safety, Jalen Petrie, cornerback type deals can go. Louis Cine, that's where these guys can go. But they definitely need one offense, one defense. I've seen people mock 2 receivers, and I can't imagine a team that plays in that good of an offensive division only investing in offense. Like the quarterbacks in that division are so good right now, and Kansas City really struggles rushing the passer, and their secondary really lost players that if they don't invest in one of those 2 positions on one of these picks, that they're definitely going to be behind the 8 ball, and they're going to have to score a ton of points every game. Cincinnati Bengals are in a super fun spot. They don't have a ton of holes. They can add to their secondary. Their secondary isn't necessarily fantastic. They can add in the defensive tackle position. One of the guys that I wanted to bring up, and I'm going to end the draft right at 32, talk about the rest of the teams who don't have draft, possibly what they could do. But I want to highlight other players as well that I think may absolutely skyrocket upwards. Travis Jones, the guy out of UConn, was their best player. He's 6'5", 333. He can move. He can get in and out of cuts. He can rush the passer. He can stuff up the box. This is a guy that I really, really, really like. Mocked here, and it's just because what the Bengals did last year and what you kind of saw from them is they got so many weapons at every single level that you can kind of get greedy and hope, hey, if he isn't good this year and he's only serviceable, or he's only a pass rusher, or he's only a run stuffer, we can wait because this team's going to grow as we get older. And by year 4, you're still going to be underneath all of those big contracts that are looming with Joe Burrow, with Jamar Chase, with who's the other receiver? Oh my God. Anyway, the guy from Clemson. So that's kind of what you can see there. The Lions, we talked about them. So moving on here, I need to pick up all the teams that don't have first-round draft picks and highlight what they may do in the draft. San Francisco, they're going to eventually need help at corner and guard. Their offensive line is good at 61 and 93. It'll be interesting to see where they go. But cornerback is kind of a position they could need. And if they trade Debo and get better draft prospects, they would probably go receiver as well. This team is really established in the same way that if you don't draft a backup quarterback with Aaron Rodgers when you go to the NFC Championship game, the same thing could be said with this. If Jimmy Garoppolo would have had another receiver, lineman, DB, nose tackle, guy to grind his way, who would have known if they would have beat the Rams? They should have probably beat the Rams regardless. So it's so interesting to kind of see how all this plays out. Who else doesn't have a draft pick? The Rams. They only have 104. They haven't really done a good job in the draft, but they need help defensively here. Their offense is going to be okay. They got depth at the positions. They may take a running back late, but this is one where they should really invest either on the edge or at cornerback because they need depth at both, and this is basically a depth pick. A guy who has a low floor that can kind of produce earlier rather than later, but he doesn't necessarily have to be this freak of nature. The Raiders have pick 86. They picked up Devontae Adams in the offseason. They added to their defensive line. Their O-line needs to get better. They took Leatherwood last year. Leatherwood last year. Didn't turn out well, so it'll be interesting to see how they kind of manipulate and maybe add an offensive lineman at 86. DBs could use some work and maybe some man meat up front, but they're 86, so they're in the third round. They're kind of removed from this draft from the most part. Colts. See, the Colts don't make any sense. They have all this extra capital. They won't sign a receiver, even though they need a receiver, and Matt Ryan needs weapons to throw to, but they won't sign one. And then they don't have a first-round draft pick, so they're only getting back-end draft picks in the first place from the Carson Wentz deal to Washington. And they had a very bad pressure rate, and they need to replace their left tackle. So they're in a really weird spot where they should compete, but who the hell knows? It doesn't really make sense how they're in this space with having this many good players at a bunch of different positions and still having so many consistent holes. Up next, we are going to jump to the Dolphins. 102nd, so it doesn't really matter. Maybe you get a depth piece linebacker, a edge rusher, really work on that defense. You tried to max out the offense this year. You got linemen, you got Tyreek Hill, you got running backs, you got everything you really need. And so you got a new man at the helm. You got Tua. If everything goes well, Tua's the guy. If it doesn't, then you move on from Tua because you're going to set him up for success with all this firepower offensively. Browns, 44th pick, so they still have a high second. Right now, they need an edge rusher badly. Chase Winovich is the starting D-end. Now, if they re-sign... he's from South Carolina. I know his fucking face. So they got Myles Garrett on one side. Oh, my God. Anyway, the edge rusher from South Carolina that has the long dreads, Jadeveon Clowney. Yeah, so if Jadeveon Clowney signs back, then they're pretty much okay, and they just shift all that concern from the edge and move it in to the tackles because they got a decent secondary, got a decent O-line. They're kind of set up to compete. They also have 78. I wouldn't be surprised if they grabbed a receiver there, maybe like a Christian Watson, but they do need additional wide receiver depth, so don't at all be surprised when they go up and grab him. But really interesting to see how all that pans out with Deshaun Watson, and if he misses 5 games, 2 games, 1 game, what we're going to be seeing there. The Broncos, 64-75, so they have high leverage picks still. This is all about going to be reinforcing the offensive line and probably adding depth secondary. What I see with Denver is in adding Russ Wilson is they want to win now. And they added Dexter Lawrence. No. The guy from the Cowboys. I can't remember his name. But they added him next to Bradley Chubb. So their DNs are going to be good. They could use some help interior, but those guys usually take a long time to come forward, and when you kind of want to win now, you got to win now. Their wide receivers are going to be KJ Hamler, Judy, Sutton, and there's one other guy. But they're going to be stacked there. They got Javonte Williams. Maybe they end up adding another running back late in the draft, but this is a place where you're trying to get immediate guys. You don't care if 3 years or you don't care 4 years from now if they're not Pro Bowlers. You have a talented enough roster to get impact rookies right now. This isn't a build 3 years from now type of deal. This is a we went in on it and we need to hit. The Bears own the 39th. This would be linemen and then defensive back. Their O-line has been so bad. Justin Fields has been running for his life. They traded away so many draft picks for so many years that they just don't have – they're bereft of talent. Their wide receiver room is okay, but they need to add. Darnell Mooney's wide receiver one, and Darnell Mooney would be a good wide receiver two, but he isn't wide receiver one, and the fact that that's not even on the list that the team needs really shows how many needs they have. O-line, D-line, corner, edge rusher. I mean, they don't have anyone. They're kind of in full rebuild, so hopefully by 2 years from now, Justin Fields is ready to go with a fully revamped team, and that reason alone is why I would go with a more productive, long-term challenge player. And it's all in the second round. They got 39, 48, and then 71. I believe that wraps up the draft. So I know it was long. I got to cut it. I got to pile it all together. I appreciate you guys all listening. Give me thoughts, comments, everything in between. The goal here is to, like I said, recap this on Saturday or Sunday. It's probably going to be shorter. I'm really going to just highlight some guys. And that's the draft part. I have a few guys I really want to hit on. Let's see if I can pick them up. Okay. Edge rusher. Nick Bonito. He's from Oklahoma. This is a guy, he's a stand-up edge rusher. He's not going to have his hand in the dirt. He might not be the best run defender, but from day one, this man is going to come off the ball with his balls sweaty hot and get to the quarterback. So if someone needs an immediate pass rush present in the early second round to maybe compete, this is the guy that you can immediately plug and play. I mean, just watch his tape. He's fast. He's nasty. He has multiple moves. He's not just a straight up rip defender. He knows how to rush the passer. And on the same notion, when I watched his Nebraska game tape. He was able to QB spy as an edge, as a guy who is stand-up linebacker, was able to spy Adrian Martinez effectively all game. And that's just impressive. If you watched any of it, you would know. And that is a guy that I'm looking that may jump up into the early second round that you wouldn't normally see. Okay, last guy that I think jumps into the second round that maybe none of you have heard about is Rachaad White. He is an older running back. He played 2 years at Division II, or he was at a D2 for 3 years, then transferred to Arizona State, was immediately impactful, but he doesn't have a ton of wear and tear on his body. But last year he had 1,000 yards rushing. He had 452 yards receiving. He is a prototypical 3-down back. He's 6'1". He runs a decent 40. His RAS score was decently high. This is a guy who's going to jump day 2, where a team that needs a pass catcher, needs a guy that can block, that's older, that can run, and has proven he can run. This is a guy that I absolutely love. And if he doesn't go early, this is a guy that's going to be very good in the pro scheme when people can, hey, we need you to catch the ball out of the backfield. He can run routes. He can do a lot of things really well. And I think that there's a lot of people sleeping on him only because he played in the Pac-12 and especially at ASU, who is straight up booty. Okay, and 2 more positions I want to look at. Don't need to look there. We want tight end and tight end. We already have the other one. Okay, tight end. So tight end. This guy, right? Jelani Woods, Virginia. He set really good precedent at the combine. Ran some really good measurements. He's 6'7", 260. He's going to be able to block decently well and be able to really establish himself, but it's receiving that he needs to get a better hand of, understanding how to sit down in zones, how to run seams and stuff. But he's a guy that's going to jump. And then the guy that's not getting talked about, or 2 guys that aren't getting talked about are Big Ten guys. First off, Jeremy Ruckert. I'm going to shit on OSU for a second because OSU consistently recruits high-end tight ends and never uses them. Now, they'll block. They'll block all day. but they don't have them run routes. They don't have, like, if you're a tight end recruit, I would never go there because your draft stock is going to fall because you're only going to be used as a blocker, and people are going to be like, well, he's not proven. It's like because Ohio State has 37 NFL first-round draft pick wide receivers. It's not because they can't catch. It's because they're better at it because they're receivers. And Ruckert is one of these guys that's going to be productive from day one. He knows how to block. He knows how to run routes. He's going to catch passes. This is a guy that's going to stick. And if the Lions can get him, ooh. And then the last guy I want to talk about before I wrap all of this up is Chigoziem Okonkwo. Hope I said that at least somewhat well. I got at least 3 of the syllables. This guy's an athletic freak. He was super productive at Maryland, and maybe you don't know about him because he went to Maryland, but he had 76 catches in his college career, which is like how, and it's like just watch Maryland football in the Big Ten, and you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But he's strong, he's athletic, he can do so many different things, and his hands are reliable, and he's fast and physical. That this is one of those guys that you don't see him through the first 6 weeks, but by week 7 or 8, you're like, oh, who's this guy? And you realize he catches a touchdown pass, and then 2 weeks later he has 65 yards receiving because they gave him some packages to get him out in space. I mean, absolutely incredible athlete, and I'm so excited to watch this draft tomorrow. One of the things that I want to really highlight is I don't know where any of these teams are going, but there's always a reason that someone picks team, or that these teams pick a player. And except the Raiders. The Raiders just pick the worst player every time. They're like, oh, we can have all of these good No, we're fine. We're fine. So it's always funny watching them draft compared to everyone else because everyone's like, who the hell had that on their board? Oh, no one, just the Raiders. The Raiders have been irrelevant for a long time. So there's always a reason, and that's kind of what I'm going to get into is I want to highlight head scratchers. Why would a team take this risk? Because there's a lot of times where it's like, oh, this was a D- pick, and then the guy ends up performing well. And it's like, well, it's a D- pick because to you and what you value as this draft expert isn't how the football game's played. And so that is going to cut me off for tonight. I appreciate all the support. Subscribe, like, do all those things. Don't do those things. Like my voice, hate it. But I'm happy to be back podcasting, and you guys have a wonderful draft night, and I'll probably see you Sunday.